the issue of propaganda. Oh. All right. Okay. Well, if you could imagine that slide.
Sorry about that. That was my fault.
Great recovery.
Yeah. So we work with the UN to create versions of this in 10 different languages. And so they've had this up they make it available in their information centers all over the world. So it's been like a smaller version of this has been up in about 60 different countries around the world, including places like Burundi, Bangladesh, and other places. That was just something they had it up a little bit in Latvia and Lithuania recently at a major conference. So it's and the version of this has been in Tunisia. So it's something that has had legs, let's say. And it's also been, I think it just closed or will be just closing in Brussels. We had a larger version. It's been to Paris. UNESCO hosted a version of this in French. And then the mayor of Paris saw it. She said, we've got to have this at City Hall in Paris. So she had it put up there. Then it traveled to another part of France at Comte-Mille, which was a former French internment camp. And so now we got some people in Luxembourg saying, it's going to come to Luxembourg. So it's going to be going there soon. So it's a topic that many people around the globe, I think, is important today. I'll just wait for that. But when we were doing this exhibition, it started out, they said, okay, Steve, we want to do an exhibition on propaganda. So we got one word. Okay, so where do we start this exhibition? Propaganda goes back to the ancient times. And then I said, well, what about those cave drawings? Maybe those are our first examples of propaganda from prehistoric times. And then, of course, when do you end it? Because propaganda continues in our own day. So it was kind of a challenge to talk about, well, maybe we should combine something looking at the US and Nazi Germany and Germany. And eventually we settled on Germany. But we wanted to ask kind of different questions than most people were doing. We wanted to look at, how did the Nazis use propaganda in a democracy when they had to compete against 30 other political parties for votes and support? And then show how they used it to facilitate their agenda, and also how did the world react to that. And so we were kind of trying to open up new areas of investigation, because most scholarship have not done anything about either the period when the Nazis were coming to power and how they used propaganda and their strategies, but also how the post-war situation. Well, one of the things that was to us fascinating was, for instance, Adolf Hitler's fascination with propaganda. As those people who've looked at, I've read Mein Kampf, which is a rather turgid, long, difficult book to get through. But two of the more lucid chapters deal with propaganda, because this was something he was obsessed with, at least from the time of the First World War, and perhaps earlier during his years in Vienna. And Hitler was somebody who saw if you look at, for instance, what he talks about in Mein Kampf, he looks at, he believed that Germany lost the war for two reasons. One, they were stabbed in the back by Jews, communists, liberals, pacifists, and others. But he also believed that Germany lost the propaganda war. That the Allies had weakened German morale through their propaganda. The Germans wanted peace, that they didn't want to fight. That Germany was on the verge of winning the war, but the Allies were successful in their propaganda use, whereas the Germans were a total failure. He said that the Allies had created an image of the German as a wicked Hun that explained all their war aims in one simple image. That here you have this image of the German, the German militarism, it's this kind of King Kong ape that is crossing the Atlantic and represents a threat to the United States. And here's another example of that. Well, Hitler learned a great deal from what other people are doing, including the Allies. One of the things, when even before he became, popular, there was a guy in Munich who collected propaganda, including World War I propaganda. And he had this fabulous collection of these materials. 1920, 1921, Hitler went there and he studied this collection. He wanted to learn how to create propaganda that worked, that mobilized audiences. And so he learned from studying this, and actually the Nazi Party bought that collection to use to learn from it, and they kept the guy on as the curator of that collection until 1945. Some of that collection ended up in the Library of Congress after the American troops took over Munich. Others ended up at the Bavarian State Library, but the Nazis saw they had to learn from others. This wasn't alone for the Nazis, but they believed in making a study of what works, what kind of images work, what kind of language, what kind of graphics work. Here's another example. But the Nazis also understood the link with advertising. And this is something Hitler said in Mein Kampf. He said, made that comparison between propaganda and advertising. He said, what would we say about a poster that was meant to advertise soap and said all soaps are good? He said, we would shake our heads in disbelief, because the goal of advertising, like propaganda, is not to say that all products are equal. It's to show why your product, why your candidate, why your nation, why your country is the best. And so he picked up on a lot of those advertising aspects of this. And some people, argue, well, he, in his days in Vienna, he did advertisements. He did, certain things. He was a budding artist. He had some notions of the power of color and all of that. But he also understood the need to craft an image of himself. This is a poster that was done in 1932 when Adolf Hitler ran for president. And this, it sometimes surprises people. He had only become a German citizen shortly before that to run for office. He wasn't a German citizen until 1932. That is the year before he became Chancellor of Germany. He wasn't a German citizen. And he only got German citizenship on a kind of, I don't want to say a fluke, but it was, he was appointed, the Nazis held some positions in some local area. And one of the things that they could do is they could appoint, officials. So, and with that came citizenship. And so he got appointed to some meaningless job. And so it came with citizenship. And so he was able to run for president. Well, Hitler learned early on, and some of this came from working with his photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, about how to craft an image, of himself that would work. So, and you see some of this at play. Because what Hitler did is, if you think about what he was saying, how he was portrayed in those years, he was the common man. the unknown soldier in the First World War. They played that up. Here's a guy that fought for Germany. He fought on the battlefield. He was a front soldier, like you and me. He was a guy that wasn't born to wealth. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was a common man. This is perfect for democracy and democratic policy. He's not an aristocrat. He's not somebody that has a lot of wealth. And this is another thing that surprises people. He never held a political office in his life, and he became a presidential candidate. And if you look at this poster, he's silhouetted against this black backdrop, like movie stars were done in the 1920s and 30s. And so it highlights his face. He's presented as a leader of strength, will, and determination, somebody that could get you out of the Great Depression. And also, if you take a look at this, what's he looking at? You, exactly. Okay, this is kind of what some people call a direct appeal. That's looking at the audience. Can anybody think of any other examples of this? Uncle Sam wants you. Exactly. And so it's the idea that, in Uncle Sam Wants You, it's, wants you to enlist, wants you to buy a Liberty Bond. In this case, he just wants you to vote for him. And the last thing I want to say about this image, they tested these things. Sometimes you see it with a punctuation over the I and slightly different versions of this. But the Nazis held this poster up until the final weeks of that campaign, because they said, if you put this one up, people are going to notice it, because the other candidates will use brightly colored posters. When this is up, your eye is going to be drawn to this. And it worked. Because you could see in some film footage of kiosks where these posters are, and you see it next to it, anti-Nazi, anti-Hitler posters. But your eye is drawn to this one. And so it says something about the sophistication of Nazi thinking, about how you market your candidate to an audience. He didn't win the election, but he got 13, 14 million votes. Not bad for somebody who never, ran for a public office before. And this is another example showing a variation of that poster. But if you think about it too, Hitler in 1920 created that flag. He combined the swastika, which is a symbol found in cultures all over the world, from China to Iran to Africa to Native American culture, to Europe, it's even found in some ancient Jewish synagogues. So it's a symbol that's found in various places and with different meanings. And other right-wing groups have used it. But what Hitler did is he took that symbol and he combined it with those three colors. Now you probably say, whoop-de-doo, what difference does that make? But those are the three colors of the old German imperial flag. So they resonate with people that remember the old monarchy with fondness. But they also resonate with people, for instance, if the communists and socialists both used the red flag. And so Hitler understood that this kind of blood red resonated emotionally with audiences. He created posters in red because he said, that's going to get people in those beer halls to see me. It's a provocative, emotive color. Those also were the three most popular colors of posters in the Weimar Republic. So it worked in a lot of different ways, but it's also a trademark, a logo that becomes firmly identifiable with, indelibly linked to the Nazi Party. So that when you see that, you know what party it represents. And so, and logos like posters are meant to capture your attention and hold it for only a few seconds, but it's to stick in your mind. You remember, a catchy slogan, a symbol, and it's a way of attracting attention and getting people to remember it. This is also something I wanted to, doesn't really come out that well here, but this is a painting that was done to represent Adolf Hitler in the 1920s when he was speaking. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to what this is called? It was painted by a Nazi painter, Hermann Otto Heuer. It became very popular. It was done in 1937. It was at the Great German Art Exhibition of 1937. It was reproduced as postcards and all kinds of things. It was very popular. Anyone want to hazard a guess what this is called?
The bird of Oregon.
Okay, good guess.
Listen to me.
Listen to Me is also good. But
I'll buy the next one.
what? I'll buy the next one. That's it. If only that. But it's called In the Beginning Was the Word. Now that comes from the New Testament book of John. But instead of having Jesus as this messianic figure, you have Adolf Hitler. When you see this painting, the light radiates off his face onto the crowd. And the crowd itself is represented as a kind of a microcosm of German society. So you have people of different genders, you have women and men, you have people of different ages, you have people of different classes. Yeah.
Now, I can only see two women in that. Are there more? And
Yeah, there's one there, one there, one there, one there. And it's hard to tell from this. I mean, the
the
most.
vast majority are male.
Yeah.
Okay. That, of course, denotes an aspect as well.
Right. But when you think about this, this is a perfect reflection of Nazi ideology, because one of the things that the Nazis emphasized, and Hitler constantly emphasized, was that all the other political parties in Germany were special interest groups. There were parties for the workers. There were parties for the big businessmen. There were parties for the peasants. There were parties for the Bavarians. There were parties for the Catholics. But there was no party, he said, that spoke for all Germans, except the Nazi Party. He said the Nazi Party is open to all Germans, regardless of whether you're a worker, whether you're an aristocrat, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, because Jews are excluded because they're not deemed as a religious group, but as a race. But and regardless of where you come from in Germany, whether you're from Prussia, Saxony, Thuringen, Bavaria, you could all be a part of this movement. That this is a movement that speaks for all Germans. They often would refer to it as a movement, not a political party. And so the painting shows that Hitler's appealing to all Germans, and that all Germans find something appealing in Adolf Hitler. It also emphasizes the importance that Hitler placed on the spoken word. Hitler believed that all the great events in history were the result of the spoken word, whether that's Christianity or all the great movements of the past. Leon Trotsky, who was the Bolshevik leader, said that's because Hitler couldn't write. But nonetheless, Hitler and the Nazis placed a great deal of emphasis on the spoken word. They went and they trained speakers. That is, there were special schools to train you to be an orator, and they graded you after every performance. And they said, okay, this person can speak at a local level, this person could speak at a regional level, this person could speak at a national level, and on these particular issues. They gave instructions how you set up that room, how you create a particular ambiance that's going to make those messages make audiences more receptive to those. So it's the notion of using these things to create a kind of an environment that makes these views that age you psychologically, winning people over.
Nobody's got a mustache. Nobody looks like him at all.
Yeah, and he's also standing on like he used to do this in those beer halls so he could be seen. He would stand on a table or something so that people could do it. There was a whole mystique about that. Like, for instance, he never stayed around for questions because that would break that mystique. You know, it's like Elvis has left the building. You know, and he didn't like it. Even when he dealt with reporters, they had to submit questions that he wasn't going to let them ask at will. He wanted to control the message. That's, you know, so this is all sophisticated thinking. But, you know, the other thing that sometimes we forget about is the importance of body language. Hitler understood that. And this is something all contemporary politicians understand. You know, they go to media training to show what gestures you should use. Well, Hitler understood that there are photographs that Hoffman took of him practicing in front of a mirror, in front of a camera, using particular gestures that he used in front of audiences, because they represented something. When I went for media training a number of years ago, I went a couple of times, but one time I went and they said, okay, when you want to make a major point, come up with a gesture. And they said, think about President Obama. He was the guy before this, current president. But, and they said, when he puts his hand up like that to hold a tennis ball, like he's holding a tennis ball, he's trying to make a major point. So it's this understanding, and this is the 1920s, and Hitler's all understanding the importance of that. The importance of creating this public persona, the importance of body language and what it transmits to an audience. So this is, you know, it shows a great deal of sophistication. The last thing I want to say about this painting is it belongs to the US Army. Yes, we actually borrowed this painting from the US Army and had it on display. It's huge. But the US Army, after the war, confiscated between 8,000 and 10,000 pieces of German artwork that they thought promoted militarism or Nazism, and they brought it to the United States. Most of it was returned to Germany, except for about 450 pieces that they believed to be too politically charged to be sent back, and that's one of them. This was another aspect of Nazi thinking, which was harnessing new technology to get messages out. The Nazis were fascinated by technology. In the 1920s, they were producing their own films. Going from silent films to sound films, even before they came to power. They saw the importance of records. This is a record from 1932. And you see the pictures on it, you've got this. And it's a speech about Adolf Hitler. And it conjures up those themes: the common soldier, the unknown soldier, the common man, and on the other side is music. Now they produced these records and you could buy them. You could rent these. They played them at meetings. They also, when they were campaigning, they had trucks with loudspeakers. So they play these, and it would capture public attention. People go over there, to find out what this is doing. They would stop, they distribute their stuff, and they capture the audience's attention that way. They also engaged in what we would call niche marketing today. That is, they had a message which was that they spoke to all Germans, but they realized you had to address different audiences in different ways. So here you have ones that are addressed to workers, but workers broader than the communist or socialist sense. That is, this is both white collar and blue collar workers. That is, workers of the head and workers of the fist. Those that work with our arms and those that are office workers. Women. The Nazis, and this was very shocking to many people in the 1920s, were successful in winning over significant number of women. And this shocked like women in leftist parties, women rights advocates. Why would women vote for these guys? They don't support women's rights. They have no women in the top leadership. They have no women in the parliamentary representation. So why are women voting for them? But they did. And the Nazis made a concerted effort to win women over. And for good reason. Women were the majority of voters. So they knew they had to, in order to get masses of support, they had to win over women. And often it was, through particular types of messages, and they reached out to women that were housewives, women that were workers at factories, women that were working in offices. But they did the same thing with, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute. This is a poster specifically for women. And it says, millions of men without work, millions of children without a future. And it says, save the German family, vote Adolf Hitler. And look at where where are her eyes directed? Yeah, to other women. You can change things. It's an empowering message. Much like far right in Europe does today. It's, you can change things. All you have to do is vote for Adolf Hitler. It's up to you. And so this shows kind of this, how sophisticated their thinking was.
Actually, that is also the classic triangle that is on dark and holds your feet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it plays on all kinds of things. They understood the power of like visual metaphors like this. So you have the swastika as a sun that's producing, food. So this one is freedom and bread. This is an appealing slogan. The Nazis were big on appealing slogans. Freedom, bread, freedom and work. And, during the Great Depression, of course, when millions of people are out of work, these resonate with people. That, and the Nazis said, look, we're going to fight for freedom and we're going to give you bread. Nobody's going to run on a platform that says I'm opposed to freedom or giving out jobs or giving people food. It doesn't say how you're going to do it and what it means. Freedom, work, bread are all appealing things. Doesn't matter what political party you belong to. Those are all appealing things. They resonate with people. The Nazis were also very careful not to say exactly what they were going to do. Here's another one, work and bread, with this notion that the Nazis, and you see it, are going to give out jobs. So another one of these strong metaphors. Anti-Semitism was a very strong part of the Nazi Party platform right from the beginning. And this is one example from Nuremberg. This is, I don't know if people are familiar with, Phipps was the illustrator for Der Stürmer, one of these rabid anti-Semitic newspapers, which I'll mention later. But this is one of their posters. The Nazis were anti-Semitic to the core, but they also understood it didn't appeal to every German audience. That is, they got feedback. They were very much interested in collecting feedback from their local groups. So they would say, okay, the local groups would report back and they said, well, our constituents aren't interested in the so-called Jewish question. They're interested in economic issues. They're interested in social issues. So Nazis said, okay, play up those issues. Don't talk about anti-Semitism. Don't talk about the Jewish question. When Hitler runs for president, doesn't really use it. Doesn't mean he's not anti-Semitic? No. But he knows he wants to get as many votes as possible. The way to do that is not to bring up things that are really divisive. And he did this in his speeches. For particular audiences, bring up the Jews. In other words, he didn't do it at all. Because he knew they wouldn't react well to it. And so he tailored those to the audience. Now, of course, once he gets appointed, immediately they began implementing anti-Jewish legislation. In areas where anti-Semitism was strong, they played it up. But they understood their audiences and what. Oh, this is like the punch must land, you know, and then this is.
What's the meaning of the 10?
Oh, the 10, those are where in German elections, usually it was like the numbers related to your popularity. Used to be, I don't know if it is, in New York State, it used to be there was row A, B, C, and you know, those were the major parties. So the Nazi Party in this particular election, this is from 1928, so they will list 10 or slate 10 on that. So it was kind of lower down on the list. But the Nazis were kind of parodying this poster in this. This is by very famous German Jewish communist artist John Hartfield. John Hartfield was one of the creators of photomontage and all that, but he was an ardent communist. He designed this poster for the Communist Party. You know, 5 fingers, you make a fist, 5, you know, blank, 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 with 5 fingers, you know, that you 5 fingers, you know, the hand has 5 fingers, 5 fingers you can, you know, punch the enemy, 5, you know, vote row 5, vote list 5 for the Communist Party. You have this representation of the Jew. What's he doing? Holding up the 5 for the Communist Party. And the fact that he's red is telling people Jews are communists. So you're mimicking that same poster from 1928 and saying, okay, all Jews are communists. Okay. And this is just to give you an illustration of how graphically appealing the Nazis were. The first 2 ones are Nazi posters. That one with the 4, that's the guy that's the current chancellor. You can't get any more boring than that. You know, if you, and then you have this, next to it is the Social Democratic Party, which was the lead, until the Nazis supplanted it in 1932, leading party in Germany. They saw how popular the swastika was, so they created that symbol of those 3 downward pointing arrows. And they brought in a Russian Marxist who was a student of Pavlov and said, come up with something that's going to rival what the Nazis are doing with the swastika. So he created this symbol, and they were studying this. They said, worked for about 6 months. The Nazis, of course, you know, they would deface those posters and make 3 more arrows on the other side to make an umbrella. You know, so that was, and the Communist Party had risen up to number 3. Well, the Nazis came to power in 1933, not through elections, but Hitler was appointed, and almost immediately they began restricting the rights of other political parties. If you think about how quickly, and then Hitler was appointed because of the mass support behind him. We tend to forget about how big the Nazi Party got. But in 1928, just a year before the Depression, the Nazi Party had 12 seats in the German Reichstag, German parliament, out of about 500. They were nothing. Next election, 1930, got 107 seats. Next national election, in July of 1932, 230. From 12 to 230 in just a couple of years. No political party in German history, no political party in world history has ever done that. Now, it happens during the Great Depression where you've got a climate conducive to those messages. But all those other political parties had the same opportunity. But only the Nazi Party really succeeded in doing it. The center kind of dropped out of, you know, you got polarized politics, and the Nazis were able to build up this huge mass support. And so that was the reason why Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor. He wanted a government that had mass support. Because the previous chancellor, the previous three chancellors couldn't rule by majority rule. They couldn't get anybody. Von Papen only got 6 people, not even of his own party would support him. But the Nazis, once they came to power in 1933, immediately began to restrict the rights of other political parties to engage in propaganda, hold meetings. This is days after Hitler's won. First month, you know, the Reichstag fire decree takes away the civil liberties of all Germans, lasts till 1945. You have the mass arrests of political opponents, primarily communists. First 100 days, you've also got first concentration camps set up. Germany goes from being a state with over 30 political parties to a state with just one in less than 6 months. They dismantled democracy in a short amount of time. In that time period, they also created this Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda in Joseph Goebbels, who was also the head of the Nazi Party's propaganda apparatus. But Goebbels saw the importance of controlling the media and culture, but also to get messages out. So they worked with manufacturers to create inexpensive radios, like this People's Receiver. So more Germans could have a radio. So those Germans that got a radio phone said, oh my God, I'm done to that government. I never had a radio before. Now I can listen to all these programs. The Nazis wanted the big audience. They get propaganda in your house. And they created programs for women, for families and others. And they used a lot of entertainment to do that. So the audience increased dramatically. And they understood that entertainment could be a very powerful way of getting messages into people's houses. Over there, Nazi Germany was the first country in the world to introduce regular television broadcasting. 1935. 1936 Olympics were the first major televised sporting event. They saw the importance. They recently discovered that Nazi Germany was the first country in the world to introduce 3D films, also in the 1930s. So they understood the importance of technology. Technology can reach new audiences. They got involved in overseas broadcasting. 1938, they're broadcasting, in English, in Spanish, in Arabic. And during the war, you've got 24 languages or more, because they want to get a global reach. They sell things like that say, well, remember how things were. And it says, the Fuhrer promised to motorize Germany. And it shows how many people had cars in 1932. And it says, well, 1935, how many people have cars? And then it says, the Fuhrer created the Volkswagen. That is the people's car. And they encourage people to buy these. They say, okay, save your money, you're gonna get a car. Nobody got a car, but they said that was a selling thing. That you might use, the Autobahn was something the Nazis portrayed to make, then Hitler was digging the first shovel to create that. So they, the idea of putting people back to work and success. Likewise, lifting all those restrictions that the Versailles Treaty placed on Germany. You've got this very strong visual metaphor of the swastika cutting through all those chains that had restricted Germany from the Versailles Treaty. Victory over Versailles. The other thing that the Nazis did, remember I said they created this image of bringing all sides together. But you also had to explain to Germans that not everybody fit into that national community. Some people were excluded because they were not racially part of that community. And this was kind of difficult because you know, you had to explain to people, okay, well, this, you know, first of all, who is a Jew? Like this is a chart explaining the Nuremberg laws. So it's who's of German blood, who's of mixed blood, second degree, who's of mixed blood, first degree, who's Jew, you know, and who's Jewish. And then there are all kinds of subcategories of this. And all this becomes important because every German has to fill out a genealogical table. You want to get married? You got to fill that out. If you want to have a job, you got to fill that out. You got to go back to about 1800, unless you're in the SS and you have to go back further. So genealogists have a field day because people have to hire them to track down who their relatives were. And the Nazis confiscate church records. So they want to find out who got baptized when they weren't an infant. Because that might be an indication they weren't Christian before they were baptized. And so all of this becomes important in explaining who fits in and who doesn't. So you have posters that say, you know, this one says, it says German business, firm prices, you know, enough of this Jewish, you know, peddler, you know, spirit. Another aspect of this was even using games, using things that appeal to youth, whether those are those toy soldiers and it shows Hitler and his arm goes up and down like this, or posters of the Hitler Youth, you know, to bring kids in. And it says, you know, even you belong to the Fuhrer. And making these appealing for people, kids who want to belong. But you can have private companies creating games like this one, which is called Judenraus, Jews Out. This was created in 1938 by a private company. It reflected the Nazi policy up until 1941, which was all Jews had to leave. So the game, every player got one of those figures. It's a dice game. And each one of those circles is a German Jewish business. If you landed on that, you got one of those cones with a negative stereotype of Jew. If you collected 6 Jews who won the game. And at the bottom, it's covered up, but it says off to Palestine. So the idea is to get kids to say, they don't belong here. Those Jews don't belong here. They should go somewhere else. They're not a part of our community. They're different. And so what you have, Nazi propaganda was very insidious in many ways because they peddled hate like through this Der Stürmer thing, emphasizing that Jews committed ritual murder. And some of these issues came out, like these special numbers came out in the editions of 2 million.
Stürmer is the #1 hate site for national supremacists in the world right now. It's called the Stürmer.
Or is it Stormfront?
Well, they use that.
Yeah.
Paper. You know,
Oh, yeah. No, it's,
all over the United States. It's on Facebook, it's on, you can get it everywhere.
oh, yeah. No, and in Germany, of course, they put it up on city streets and they marketed this in circulation. Why not? It was about 500,000 or so. It was a weekly, but every single article, every single issue was about the Jews. It didn't cover any other news. It's just about Jews. It was a one-note newspaper that even other Nazi propaganda said, they gotta stop this. This is just, you know, it's not that they disagree with the anti-Semitism, but it was so heavy-handed and that's all it said. But they had other ways of doing it, like for instance, these floats. Yeah.
Just want to say that hatred is one of the ways of uniting people in a very equal way.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was one of the things they did with the Jews,
Oh, yeah.
because they were right there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good way of reinforcing that unity, particularly, you know, in wartime, it becomes very important presenting the Jews as an internal threat, not only just an alien race within society, but an actual threat. Like this was a float, a parade float. There were a number of these that were done. And it shows This is a float showing Jews coming in from Poland into Germany. And it says they came, they took. And you see following them are like cockroaches, vermin. And on some of those bags, those suitcases, they have the names of Jewish businessmen that were involved in major scandals. And then if you look at this, what they're going through, you see what they put up on the side. It's not that clear. Those 3 arrows for the German Social Democratic Party, because they argued German socialists let these people in. But they came into Germany because of that. This was another way in which they promoted anti-Semitism. It's a very popular exhibition today. Look at Judah, the Eternal Jew or the Wandering Jew. This was an exhibition that opened up in Munich but traveled all over, and then there were versions of this that were done in France and Belgrade and various other things. And it's actually, a lot of their exhibitions were very sophisticated. Like looking at it from a curatorial perspective, they're done graphically very modernistic. Like this one, it's what they peddle that, is so offensive, but they were sophisticated enough to know that you had to use very engaging techniques to do it. So this is telling people that, who are the Jews? What are that they're a mixture of different races. And here are the typical external characteristics. This is a Jewish nose. This is, these are the characteristics of the Jewish people. They're a mixture of black and Arab and, or Oriental blood, and all, non-European. Then this is one from the Vienna show, and it says, and they tailored these exhibitions to those particular audiences. So it says, Austria was once a bulwark against foreign invasion. Together, it's a football in the hands of Jewish world power interests. And then you've got this image of how the Jews took over Vienna. And then they do this thing, to kind of emphasize, that Jews don't speak German, it's that they give it a kind of a Yiddish inflection to promote this alien notion. They did the same thing in Berlin. This one's Jews in Berlin, same exhibition. And to show, how Jews, Jewish involvement in the film industry, Jewish involvement, domination of the press, all these kind of things that they wanted to emphasize. And of course, one of the things that they did over that course of time is they built up this kind of, they tried to incite hatred, but they also created this kind of fostered a climate of indifference to what was happening to Jews. So you promote this idea that all Germans should be together. Don't worry about those other people. They're not, that they don't belong here. They try to sell the war, which the Nazis initiated, but Hitler understood you can't sell this as we're going after territory. You say it's a defensive thing. Remember, when he sells, how does he justify war against Poland? Poland attacked Germany. And they staged this incident. How much time do I have?
Just a few more minutes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll quickly go. So they create this, but they also create this image of the Jew as a threat. That the Jew is responsible for starting the war. Those people who remember 1939, January 30th, and Hitler's anniversary of taking the chancellorship, he gives a speech, often called the prophecy speech, in which he said, if international world Jewry once again succeeds in plunging Europe into war, it will not be the Bolshevization of Europe and the destruction of the European peoples, but it will end in the annihilation of Europe's Jews. And he makes that prophecy 5 times during the war, or he alludes to it. So remember, the Jews laughed at me when I said that. And then, like 1940, she said, "I'm not laughing now." You know, that he was a prophet. He said that this was going to happen. But it's, you lay the blame on the Jews, that the Jews started the war. Germany's defending itself. Jews are behind all the enemy powers. That the Jew, this is one that was done in Serbia, that the Jews are responsible for democracy, for Freemasonry, for communism, for capitalism, and that, you know, and portraying the Jews as essentially as murderers. And the Nazis were, in contrast, when you think about, for instance, Rwanda, Nazis weren't asking Germans to go out and kill their Jewish neighbors. In fact, you know, Goebbels wrote a piece. He says the Jews are guilty. It doesn't matter whether that Jew lives in Moscow, London, or New York. They're all guilty. Your neighbor is part of this. He said, but we don't expect you to do anything. The state's going to protect you. Don't harm your, you know, the Jews in your neighborhood. Let the state take care of it. Now, when you think about it, that's very easy for people to accept. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to take any personal responsibility. All you have to do is let it happen. While they deport your neighbors, you can say, I didn't do anything. That the state is taking them away. And also, in some ways, they play, at least in Germany, in contrast to Europe, often they deport Jews on passenger trains. They don't say they're going off to be killed, they're being resettled. They tell the Jews this too, being resettled. So the notion is you're going somewhere else, and that's, because that might not be nice, but you're not saying they're being killed. So it leads to all this kind of, ways people could rationalize this. But they also tell Germans, they say, don't believe those stories about Germany killing civilians. That's atrocity propaganda. Remember the First World War? They said we cut off the hands of Belgian kids. We didn't do any of that. These are lies that they spread about us. And so they harped on that. And so, they controlled information. But then this, this idea that, this constant barrage of propaganda, that it wears people down. That, people become indifferent to what's happening to somebody else. And that's something that occurred. But after that, and I'll just conclude here, after the war, they tried a number of propagandists and also criminalized Nazi propaganda. Because the Allies believed very strongly that Nazi propaganda had helped prepare a population to go to war and had also prepared a population